Thank you and welcome to all of you. For those that don't know me, I'm Dr. Sarah Mcgee. I am chair of the communication department. I also teach in the broadcast, media ethics, journalism, multimedia, and digital media areas. So thank you again for joining us today. This is going to be just a discussion amongst these incredible Loyola graduates who are all out doing wonderful things and engaging in the world of communication, which not just is related to communication majors and jobs, but everything and everyone. From those of you here, I know we have a mix. Communication is in everything, and storytelling is literally at the foundation of any job you do, regardless of that. But we've got four terrific people that I want to introduce themselves to you, tell you a brief little bit about them. Then I will we'll have a discussion till about 5:15. I would encourage you, and I'll remind you as we get closer, you will have a Q&A time. I would ask that you put questions in the chat. And again, we'll try to use about the last 15 minutes between 5:15 and 5:30 to answer your questions. So be thinking of them as we go, and feel free to, as I get ready to call, to put them in the chat. We hope you will engage, ask your questions, but also get a good sense of some really interesting people doing interesting things in the field. So without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to each of our guests and ask you each to do a brief introduction. Make sure you tell us when you were at Loyola, what you're doing now, and a little bit about yourself. So Alex, shall we start with you?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you all for being here, and thank you for having me. I'm a director and producer. I work primarily in film, television, and commercials. I graduated Loyola in 2008. After that, I came to New York and started a company called Big Vision Empty Wallet, which is a production company and an inclusion-focused incubator that also runs programs to support other filmmakers. And I also serve as the VP of Special Events for New York Women in Film and Television, which is the preeminent association for women in film in the world. And right now I am producing a new series on Derek Jeter for ESPN. And I am also premiering a film at the Santa Barbara International Film Festival in about 2 weeks called Coast. The announcement just went out today. So that's what I've been spending my day doing, posting on social media for our film. And yeah, that's about it. That's who I am. And I'm happy to be here and answer your questions. And I hope it's okay if I curse. I should have asked that earlier, but I will probably curse.
It's okay. It's all right. All right, Jim, how about you?
That's a tough one to follow. Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Hogan. I graduated from Loyola in 2014. This upcoming year will be my 7th working in Major League Baseball. It'll be my 4th with the Philadelphia Phillies. And I also spent 2 years in Baltimore with the Orioles. PR assistant with the Orioles, and I'm currently a baseball communications assistant with the Phillies within PR. We have a structured business side and then a baseball side. I won't bore everybody with the details, but I can obviously answer questions later. A lot of writing, coordinating with the media. I'm currently in Florida for the final 3 weeks of spring training. So kind of a liaison between the team, mostly the players, our manager, the coaches, and the media. So, yeah.
All right. Excellent. Thank you. Gabe?
Hi, everyone. I'm Gabe Carter. I'm in Baltimore. I graduated from Loyola in 2015. I'm currently a creative director / brand manager for my own freelance entrepreneur creative agency. My goal is to hire my friends to work with them on projects. I have different people who do photography and social media and things like that. So I work with a lot of small businesses in Baltimore, helping them tell their story, create authentic connections, and grow. Yeah.
All right. Thank you much. And Isabelle?
Hi, guys. I'm Isabelle. Thanks so much for having me today. I'm so happy to be here. I just graduated from Loyola in May, so I'm a 2020 grad, and since then have been working just roughly around July in a project manager role at Mediaplanet. So Mediaplanet's a content marketing agency focused on working with clients and running campaigns in different verticals and different industries. So definitely have a lot to speak to with just kind of jumping out of school and certainly the pandemic and everything, and really just offer some kind of inspiration. I know it's a crazy time, but there's energy there and they're looking for students like you guys and everything. So I think it's really exciting. And I'm actually transitioning to a new role right now. So it's, it's exciting to see that and whatnot. So happy to answer questions and just share insights.
All right. Well, there you have it, 4 wonderful and interesting elements to the different jobs. So I'm going to start the conversation off by taking us back to the theme of this panel is a pathway to multimedia storytelling. Because no matter, as we mentioned before, and all of you kind of have alluded to, communication and telling stories is a key part of what you do, and I would argue just about what everybody does. So the first question I'm going to pose to you, and you can kind of jump in and answer sort of as you see fit, is how would you say multimedia storytelling in any aspect of it plays into the job that you currently do?
I'll go first. So I'll start with an example. I'm working with a small company right now. They're a small boutique, and we're trying to help them create authentic connections. And that happens around creating authentic content, which I would like to call their narrative or their story. And so a lot of the storytelling has to revolve around their brand identity. How do they present themselves? What do they say to other people who are engaging with their brand? And what do their ideal audience resonate with, because they hear that story and it gives them a emotional response. So that personality that brand has is the story that they are constantly sharing and telling through their marketing efforts, how they look, how they speak, and things like that. Yeah.
I'll jump in. Storytelling is literally what I do in many different mediums, many different forms. And to Gabe's point, authenticity is really key. So through Big Vision Empty Wallet, really what we do is support women, people of color, and LGBT creators who now certainly are getting a lot more opportunities than they were before when we started this company in 2010. And having done that earlier put us in a great position, because once sort of Hollywood decided to pay attention and catch up, or at least start to, we already had a great community of filmmakers who were underrepresented, especially in the Hollywood space and in series as well. So a lot of what I do is look for people with interesting stories and interesting points of view. So yes, a lot of this business is about knowing your craft, but it's also very much about having an interesting story and or interesting take on your life experience. I think it's really important for me in collaborating with storytellers who aren't just filmmakers, aren't just writers, but have interests and experience outside of those things. And I think I didn't necessarily realize at Loyola, when I'm taking theology and philosophy, and I'm like, oh my fucking God, I don't want to take these classes. And now I'm so glad that I had to take those classes, because I have this education and this just sort of perspective that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So while yes, I think it's really, really important to focus on your ability to tell good stories, I think it's also important to have a well-rounded curriculum and life. So you can talk about more than just film, or more than just sports, or more than just whatever it is that you're working in. Because that gets boring if you can only talk about one thing.
Jim, any thoughts on your aspect from your field?
Yeah, so ours is, from my department specifically, it's a mix of different things. So one of our objectives daily during the season is trying to make all the guys look good when the media is covering them. So it's a lot of stats-based writing, which I do, despite my inability to count in my opening remarks. I think I messed up my years. But we do a lot of stats, and that's in our game notes, and that's basically for the media while they're covering us. and then they can incorporate that in their stories. Our beat writers tweet constantly, and it's really information that they're putting out for fans to keep people interested, to stir debate. So that's one aspect of it. We also do write stories for our yearbook, scorecards. And again, that's just highlighting a player's abilities on the field, sometimes their ability off the field if they're engaged in the community. We don't do as much of that in our department, but we do a little bit of that. And then also just pitching stories to media and working with them in a variety of ways. So TV, radio, writers, blogging has picked up exponentially since I started, and they've been involved a lot more, so helping them. And it's really a mix of all those things into one. So if that makes sense.
No, that makes sense of mixing it with everything. And then Isabelle, from your perspective coming at it, how would you say you're engaged with it?
Absolutely. I think everyone's kind of shared just this encompassing big picture that we need to think about, specifically in my position at Mediaplanet. So we'll run campaigns kind of semi-quarterly, and I've worked on a lung health campaign. So it was obviously extremely pertinent, was launching in October. And I never imagined when I was at Loyola that I wanted to be at an agency. I had strictly kind of worked and done social media or done marketing for one company. So the thought of being at an agency, I was like, I don't know, I'm kind of dealing with a lot of different clients. Specifically, when I was at companies themselves, I kind of thought it was amazing when I started to see that they were engaging with agencies. I thought, well, don't you just do everything in-house? But then realized, when you're broadening kind of the table, you're having more perspectives come, it can even so much farther amplify your story. So working in this lung health campaign, my specific client was the Lung Cancer Foundation of America. And they had obviously extremely compelling stories and stories they really needed to tell and bring out and draw out. And we worked and we made this whole plan with them. They had a podcast launching basically when people were first diagnosed with lung cancer. How can we share a story, about it? How can we bring a podcast about? Because for those first 5 minutes, there's a stat that everything is just completely kind of wiped and whatnot. So what inspiration could we give to them and what credibility and knowledge? And that story kind of came up organically. How are we going to put that together? How we're going to do this through production and social elements and everything. But then there was another client that was a radon detection client, which for me, I didn't know anything about radon and lung cancer. So to be able to actually work and kind of dive in and tell that story. And yes, there's a story of their product, but there's also a greater mission built into that brand. And I think that's what we have all seen, regardless of what industry we're in. And I've seen it kind of touching different verticals. Every brand has to have a story at this point. You can't really survive kind of in the industry without it. And every brand, honestly, who are in the industry right now have stories. So it's always about pulling through it. And, while some have always kind of turned to print and some have turned to digital, there's a mix and there's a way to find it. But I think everyone kind of spoke to it that we're finding ways to integrate it and bring those and draw those out.
And I think that's really key that all of you have touched on, is it doesn't matter what type or what area or what aspect. It's about, the human nature of telling a story, whether it's a lesser known story or the most popular story out there, or a story you might not even think about, and whether that's through helping the media find it or doing that. So kind of spurring off that, and I know Alex mentioned it a little, some of you alluded to it. How would you say, I'll get into more about some of your experiences, but you all have a Loyola background. You all have the Loyola experience, the missions, the Jesuit values coming out of this. How would you say your Loyola experience helped you get to the point where you are at today, in any way that you see that it helped you?
I have a long story. I hope I don't take up too much time with it, because my own personal journey started before Loyola, and it had to deal with me wearing a beanie. And that's what most people remember when they have interacted with me, is that I'm always wearing a beanie. And I started wearing a beanie back in my junior year of high school. And I did so because I had alopecia, still have alopecia, and it affects your hair. And so coming through elementary school and middle school and things like that, there's oftentimes I would be like either bullied and all these other things. So it became a way for me to control my narrative, to wear that beanie. Meanwhile, I was still existing in its confident way when I was wearing that beanie. And as I started to get into design work and branding work and building a portfolio, when I started to get into the different things that I did at Loyola and people saw it, they would ask like, oh, who did this? And they would always say, if they didn't know my name, oh, the guy in the beanie did it. And it would slowly, oh, go get the guy in the beanie. He knows what he's doing. And eventually it became my logo. And eventually it became a way for me to control my narrative around alopecia, my narrative around design and things like that. And while I was at Loyola, it helped me kind of blend into a bunch of different areas. So it started in Graycom. I was working, doing show graphics and media and things like that. I was also learning how to do camera work and all of that. Then I started to do the fashion show graphics. The first year was a competition that I won to design the shirt for the BSA fashion show. And then second, third, and my fourth year I was there, they just gave me that position to design the fashion apparel, but also the ticket and the backgrounds that are on the fashion show, that are on during the fashion show. And then my senior year, SGA contacted me and was like, can you design posters and flyers for the entire student body? And I said no multiple times because it was my senior year and I just wanted to enjoy it. But I had some friends who were in there and they kept asking me, and eventually I said yes. And that I kept doing a bunch of different things, moonlighting while I was doing that as well. And eventually that narrative, I remember, I don't know if she's still there, Miss Kim was in the mailroom, and I made an icon that was me and my beanie. And she stops me one day and she's like, I just saw you on like Facebook, but it wasn't you. It was a cartoon version of you, but I knew it was you. And I was like, that means that I've got a strong brand, and I'm showing up and I'm making a memorable story for people. And that is a big part of my Loyola experience, is controlling that story. And then now I'm doing that for small businesses.
Definitely taking advantage of everything with Loyola there. So I think that's fantastic that you were able to find that in those different ways. How about others? How did you guys have your Loyola experience? Would you say in any way, shape, or form that anything you did inspired you?
For me, I think it was able to be so hands-on at Loyola. Learning how to use the cameras, learning how to edit, learning InDesign and Photoshop. And if I didn't have all of those skills, I'm not sure I would have got the entry-level jobs that I got and succeeded in the way that I did. I was there in the time of mini DV tapes, so it was a little different.
That was my career. Mini DV.
When I graduated, my first job was working as the assistant to the director and producers on a film shooting in London. So I had to move there for 3 months, learn how to drive on the other side of the road. And, you're the assistant. Basically, my job was to drive the director to and from set every day. They didn't have huge expectations for me. Like one day they made me dress up as a clown to scare the DP because he was terrified of clowns. Like that was the kind of thing that they thought I was going to do on the job. But I obviously wanted to create more opportunities for myself. And because I had experience through Jay's classes and through Graycom, I knew how to shoot and I knew how to edit. So I had brought a tiny little mini DV camera that I had, and they ended up letting me film the EPK, the electronic press kit for the film. So I got to interview all the actors and build relationships with them. I got to interview all of the department heads, and I learned, I acted like I knew what they did, but obviously I had no idea what they did. And I was kind of learning through these interviews. And had I not had those technical abilities and the hands-on skills to be able to sort of offer myself up to do something like that, the opportunity wasn't going to come. I literally would have just been dressing up and doing weird shit that they wanted to entertain themselves on set, as opposed to actually getting to do things where I was able to learn. So for me, it was really the technical skills, the hands-on ability that helped me elevate to the next level from my entry-level career.
Jim, how about you?
I guess kind of similar to what Alex was talking about in a way. Mine was the ability to kind of pick and choose what I wanted to do, if that makes sense. So I did a little bit of everything at Loyola, trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to do. So as a freshman, I did a terrible radio show for like a semester at WLOI. I dabbled in the student newspaper a little bit. I was in the poetry club briefly for a couple of years. And then with my courses as well. So I was actually communications writing interdisciplinary major. And that was appealing to me because there was no way I could do a double major. I wouldn't have been able to do that with my schedule. But the interdisciplinary major allowed me to pick and choose courses I wanted to take. And I could tailor my degree based on what I wanted to study. And I specialized in journalism. So that was awesome because it was the easy thing for me to do. And then also, I mean, I've seen a lot of familiar faces of faculty on this call. I had you, Professor McGee. I had Professor Frankel, I see on here. Peggy O'Neill's on here. So, and I remember a number of professors that I had, things you learn from them. I mean, I kept a number of my notebooks, maybe because I'm partially a hoarder, but that, I mean, there's things that you keep and I still reflect back on, and you take a little bit from everybody and you learn from it. And I mean, certain things helped me get internships, which led to jobs. So it's, I'd probably say the ability that Loyola gave you so many options. So that, I think that's what appealed to me for 4 years.
Oh, excellent. Isabelle, coming out more recently, but how have you had found the use for your Loyola experience?
No, absolutely. I think the way even Jim just said it, to echo that, I firmly believe Loyola gives you those tools and they're just up for your grabs to kind of take them and drive them. And I know everyone kind of at Loyola, I think, does embody that energy. It's crazy because I remember when I was applying to abroad, and I just thought of this, I didn't even really realize, but I was trying to kind of figure out, there was some question or something. I was applying at some point somewhere, something for a Loyola. And it was asking me about, you know, kind of this multifaceted approach that Loyola has in this liberal arts education. Where have you seen it? And I was in a freshman year class, the modern marvels of biotechnology. And I was like, oh my gosh, why do I have to take this course? Because anything with science was just absolutely daunting to me. And we were talking about pharmaceuticals and, you know, kind of pricing and actually going into the whole communication PR aspect of it. And it was my first acknowledgement in my mind actually running with, wow, I could, you know, be doing communication for, oh my gosh, any like really big name sounds amazing. Of course, I think we all have that brand appeal, and there are incredible jobs in you know, in certain industries. But it was like, wow, there, you know, every kind of industry and every little facet needs communications and marketing. And it goes back to Dr. McGee mentioning at the beginning, communications integrate into everything and every brand. So I think that was my first exposure to that multidimensional aspect of, you know, where this education could be bringing me and fueling me. I think a little bit to speak of my experience. I never had an internship off campus when I was at Loyola, and I have plenty of friends who did and absolutely loved it. I was always a little bit envious, but I didn't have a car, and I don't know. I just like, I hadn't committed to that. I do wish I had had one. But I think my best kind of thing I can say is that you don't have to have an internship off campus. You have so many options on campus to throw yourselves in things and enrich yourself. I was kind of speaking to the tools aspect. I mean, I was in PRSSA, I was the vice president, and me and my president, co-president, we went to California on San Diego trip. And that was fully funded by a proposal at Loyola, which is incredible, you know, that they would support something as such and encourage that and say for us to kind of drive that. I worked at the Career Center. I worked at the Loyola, you know, Office of Communications. I landed myself in the rebranded video. So I was having people text me last year. I'm living in Jersey, and I had people texting me like, hey, I just saw you on YouTube. I'm like, what are you seeing of me on YouTube? And I'm in this Loyola commercial. It's wild, kind of the journey it's taken you on and everything. I think the best thing I could, you know, kind of draw from is that capstone experience, especially for communication students, I know we kind of have a variety of majors here, is exceptional. And I think they do a really solid job of, you can also take multiple capstones if you want, but a really solid job of saying, you know, this is what could mimic if you're going to potentially be in an agency, if you wanted to be on the creative aspect or be an account executive. I had run my capstone as account executive, and I'm transitioning now into an assistant account executive position at a company, actually at a company for oncology brands, working with pharmaceuticals, specifically AstraZeneca. So it's wild even, yeah. I don't know, I wasn't even trying to go full circle because I'm just rambling, but it's just wild to think about, like, you know, how that can kind of transition and everything. So you can drive it because it's there. It's just a matter of kind of, you know, taking that wheel and everything.
And I think that's the thing it noticed in all of what you're saying is that, you know, all these different experience you have on campus, off campus, career-based, whatever, you're able to have them while you are still getting the education. And that has obviously impacted and benefited you down the road. So let's take a little bit of a turn. I'm kind of going back and forth with things. And I'll ask each of you just to talk for a little bit this question on your current jobs that you're doing. What would you say is the most challenging aspect of your current job? Now, that could be because of the pandemic. It could be of the content. It could be of, you know, whatever element you'd like. We are living, of course, in a totally new world with COVID, with social justice, with all these things happening. So I'm just kind of curious, in the different jobs in different areas, what are the challenges, maybe the biggest, or even a few if there's that you're seeing, and how are you overcoming them or working in these fields of telling stories and getting messages out there and putting them there? So I'll just throw that out there, and anyone want to jump in to start?
Is this an any year kind of thing? Okay, I can hop in if that's all right. So I guess in general with mine, I do love what I do, but there are negatives. One would be this. I'm on this a lot. Before I left for the trip, my wife kept saying, you've been on your phone quite a bit at night when it's past 5 o'clock. And that's kind of what happens when the season approaches. Being on your phone a lot is one for me. These Zoom calls, this is not very nice right now because I wouldn't be able to be on campus, but part of what we've had to do since the pandemic hit is host Zoom calls with the media and the players because there's been no clubhouse access. So that has been a major adjustment for me, having to speak on calls, opening calls, just a lot of logistical things that we've had to figure out along the way. And then lastly, just really my schedule's pretty difficult for 7 or 8 months. I've missed birthdays, I've missed weddings, I've missed seeing a lot of family things in 7 years. So there's a time sacrifice in my field. So that's one thing I wish I could fix, but I'm not able to. So.
But you obviously still enjoy it, but it's
Yes.
just figuring that with everything.
Yeah.
I actually was glad I was on mute when you said 5 p.m. because I laughed out loud.
Yeah.
Like,
Doesn't exist for a lot of us.
Yeah, and being a producer and director, there's no schedule. It's 24/7. And you know, on certain projects, on certain jobs, you're able to adjust that and try to make it like a 9 to 5, but it's not a 9 to 5. And it's cool that we get to travel and go different places, but yeah, there definitely is personal sacrifice when it comes to just availability and schedule. And I think, you know, something that I didn't realize when I was graduating that I think is helpful for anybody who's thinking of a career in film or television is that in becoming a producer, which is what I did first, before I started directing, I was primarily producing. And I didn't realize that when you're a producer, you do a lot of work for free until there is, you know, if you're not on staff, right? If you're not a full-time producer at a production company, you're doing a lot of development work and you're doing a lot of fundraising. Like, you don't get paid until you raise the money for everybody to get paid. And I think that that's something very important for people who are considering being a producer. And I'm not saying don't do it. I'm saying, like, there are kind of two different ways to do it. if you are going to be an independent producer, you have to know that you have to raise the money to make the project. And if you're going to be a staff producer, then you can actually make a salary, but you have a lot less control over what projects you're working on. You know, if you're working for a company, they're telling you what project you're staffed on for the time being. Whereas if you're a freelance producer or an independent producer, you're picking your projects, but they don't go until you make them go. So I think something that I wish I had understood when I was graduating was that there are paths in production that give you security and give you an opportunity to basically only work for money. Whereas being a producer doesn't necessarily mean you're getting paid right away. You're not making money until you raise the money. And I think, you know, I might have considered becoming a cinematographer or directing sooner than I had, or joining a union, if I had realized that there was going to be so much free work that happens before the paid work. And I think that's just something important to understand as you're graduating and trying to figure out what you want your lifestyle to be, because there are kind of two different paths that are still in production.
I think that's really interesting because, you know, something we talk about with the students a lot is you kind of have to think about what path you're going to take to get to that. And we all know, you know, unless you're a movie fairy tale, you're not going to walk out of college and suddenly be the highest paying job in your dream element, but you're going to find different paths to do it. And I think that's something that a lot of graduates, a lot of current students will say is, you know, just thinking about being prepared for that. So Gabe or Isabelle, anything to add to that, or any other thoughts or advice or pieces?
No, definitely. I mean, I think I've learned that so many things you're dealing with as a human basis and just in general, you can't meet everyone's expectations, especially when you're client facing and then you're working with creative on something and you're realizing a deliverable is going to have pushback. It's just is how it is. And I've had some really sticky conversations. And I think the thing with my job I value so much is putting the client at the forefront and wanting to adhere to all promises and everything. But I think I also have a glossy, kind of unrealistic perspective sometimes. So it is kind of weaving through. And it's also on a daily basis, just understanding, yes, you have 10 tasks, but 5 are really only the ones that need to get done today. So kind of learning, you know, you think you're so organized and you understand scheduling and whatnot, but kind of picking up that prioritization is huge. And in terms of, I mean, I onboarded to a job virtually and everything. So I made the joke about not knowing anyone's height or like how tall is everyone. And oh my God, I've heard it like 10 times on Zoom at this point back at me. And it's just not funny. But it's, you know, it's not like humanly normal for any of us to just be waking up every morning and just rolling over and getting on the computer. You know, you miss that interaction. What I will say for those who are going to be transitioning into a position where you're not going to be in office, perhaps in May or June or July, you know, there's other ways that companies have pivoted tremendously, and whether it's their internal communication or ways they're trying to make things work, that energy is there and it will work out. But, you know, it's definitely, I was excited to kind of just like get out and be in the city and everything, but that time is coming, and I think it'll amplify your work even that much farther. And definitely in terms of someone who's transitioning to a new role in a couple weeks, I feel like kind of I understand where the onboarding will head and what direction and whatnot, and feel way more confident about it. It's definitely it's challenging, but everyone's going through it with you as well. So definitely exciting.
Gabe, anything?
Yeah, there's a lot. I think I'll start with, I used to work at a nonprofit, and I worked there for 4 years. And I did I was a graphic designer. I did their photo, their video, their web, everything that I learned at Loyola. I pretty much, it was a perfect dream job almost. It was a really young nonprofit, and everyone wore a lot of hats, but I started to see very early on that, you know, there was these different departments, and at the end of their quarterly, goal or the end of their program season. They went on vacation, they got to do whatever they wanted to do, but I was doing graphic design and marketing for the entire organization. So I never had an off season pretty much. So as I transitioned into freelance, and I realized how that 9-to-5 kind of lifestyle didn't fit what I wanted, it became more apparent that I needed to protect my time and energy, because time, energy are currencies that you can't get back. And when I'm working with small businesses, they only have limited resources, but they also have limited time and energy, because usually it's one person who's trying to run this entire business. They have this grand idea of selling clothes out of some shop. How do I balance my time, energy into helping them grow with balancing my own time and energy into helping my personal goals grow? I think that was a little struggle. That was an ongoing conversation, but I started to realize that I was really good at asking questions. And the more I asked questions and asked them to myself, the more I begin to try to automate certain tasks, especially when it comes to marketing and things like that. How do I create ease in the life of my client, so that if I had to take a break or step away to protect my time and energy, they could keep their momentum going. So I kind of try to orchestrate creating space to grow. And that became really big for me. And it's what I started at Zoom, that I'm teaching other people how to create this space to grow. And it's hard, but it gets easier. And it has to deal with protecting your time and energy, trying to create ease in your life, and then trying to acknowledge your needs, both mentally, emotionally. What are your resources, things like that. And that structures your day differently. I don't like to wake up earlier than 10 o'clock. I know that's very late for some people, but I just like to roll out of bed on my own leisure. And because of that, I also tend to work best between the hours of 7 p.m. and 3 a.m. And I mean, I'm like working hard nonstop. And I started to see, oh, wow, that 9-to-5 lifestyle never fit me. Even if I was ready to go, I was excited to go to work. I loved the people I worked with. The lifestyle that I wanted was on pause, because I was trying to fit myself into, I guess you could say, society norms of what a typical work-life balance looked like. And that conversation between what did it look like for me authentically, I think that was the hardest decision and conversations that I needed to make. But once they started to happen, I think that's when I truly began to kind of get more clients. They started to see me more. I guess you can call it visualization or manifestation. But I started working at that nonprofit 4 years. That ended. And between the span of a year, I started to work at a restaurant. I was doing their social media. And I realized, oh, wow, I think I kind of want to own my own creative agency. But I was working at that restaurant like all day, 12-hour shifts. When I got home, I just wanted to go to sleep or go out, have fun. Working on that balance between, okay, how could I use all the talents and the skills that I have now to build this kind of creative agency, and to work smarter, not harder. And then the more I started to do that, the more I was in this little neighborhood. It's actually down the street from Loyola, Mount Washington. And I was working at Woodrow's Barbecue doing their social media management. And some other business in that area was like, oh, who's doing your social media? And then I got connected with them, started getting connected with a bunch of other people. And then the business association was kind of discussing rebranding their the entire community, I guess, of Mount Washington. So that became a discussion that I was part of. But I had to place myself in that situation with the energy to be actively involved in it, and controlling my life in that way, whether I choose to wake up at a certain time and where I choose to reflect and continue to learn about different marketing things that are happening. Carving that time out and learning what that looked like for me authentically was the most challenging.
I think you all kind of allude to that, is you do have to find your path. It's not the set in stone for everybody that you're going to follow it. And a lot of that, especially in the world we're living in today and for the who knows near future, finding that work-life balance, finding how often you can sit in front of a Zoom, how often you can do that, I think is really interesting. And so kind of turning that as where, students start thinking of questions, because we'll be coming to that point. But I'll say to each of you going around, what would you tell students currently, probably the most important piece of information if you had to give to this generation of students that are coming out, that are going into communications fields, et cetera? What's the best piece of advice you would give them on any element of it coming in?
I would build on what Gabe was just saying about lifestyle. Very often when we're thinking of our career path and the first job we're going to look for, we think about what we want to do and not what we want our lives to look like. And obviously you want to like what you're doing and be fulfilled in what it is that you do for a living, but also how do you want to live? Do you want a 9-to-5 job that allows you to have nights and weekends free, but you're working for somebody else, or you're being told what you're working on? Or do you want to have the freedom to pick your own projects or, find your own collaborators, but know that, you're going to be hustling, working 24/7 for months, and then have a month off and go chill in Costa Rica and, recharge. And I think it's really important when you're deciding what path you want to pursue to not just think about what it is that you want to do, but also how it is that you want to live your life.
I would 100% agree. I would say the most important thing you can do is to take action. So you have a lot of questions like, I wonder what's going to be like to be a graphic designer, but the internet exists. And you can look up so many videos of like a day in the life of a graphic designer. It was fun for me to sit and watch. There's a YouTube called The Future where he does reviews on people's portfolios, and I think they just passed either 1 million or 1 billion subscribers or something like that, probably 1 million. But it was just so cool. Like, all of this is free information that's out there, and you get to learn all the tools. You're learning them in class, you're learning them through life, you're learning them on the internet. Take note of what is working for certain people. Take note of those big businesses that you're seeing, or those small businesses that you're seeing get started, but starting to grow more and more. I was just in a webinar with, it was the Zoom CEO, and it was such a good webinar, and he was just dropping knowledge, and I had to find that webinar, but I'm always on HubSpot and looking at marketing things. There's so much information out there, so soak up what you can, but the most important thing after that is to take action. So when I got to my 4th year at that nonprofit, I was hiring interns, and it was important for my department to see with that intern where they applied what they learned in college to a personal project. So if it was just college work, like, we love to see that, but it was so important for us to see. I remember we brought in a guy because he made a poster about Stranger Things, and we just really loved it. There was another intern that we got who she just thought of an idea for like some like brand that she had in her head, and she made mock-ups of everything just for fun. And it showed us passion. It showed us that she authentically cared about design and creating cool work. But she took all the things that she had learned and just took action. And I think that's really important.
No, I think you bring up
portfolios. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's taking action is a really good element to that. Jim, let's have you, if you have that, because then I'm starting to get questions I want to ask you
Yeah.
guys. So Jim, your thoughts?
So just from my experience, I would say, and it's kind of cliche, but be persistent, but also be patient. I mean, I can't even imagine how many emails I sent to people and how many no's I got and how many I just didn't get responses from at all. Specifically, my first internship I did when I was a senior at Loyola. I really wanted to intern for the Baltimore Sun. Sent in my stuff. The editor responded, "Thank you," but you're just plain up told me you're not qualified. Your samples you sent are not on par with what we wanted. So I said, "Well, what about these?" He's like, "Well, that's closer." And then I said, "Well, what about these?" And I was persistent without being annoying. And that opened the door to an interview. And he just took a chance on me, even though he clearly told me, like, you're not where you should be compared to the other interns we're bringing in. But I learned from it. I spent 3.5 months there, and it was one of the best things I ever did. And same kind of thing when I got my job with the Phillies. I originally tried to get an internship with them right out of college. I was runner up. The guy that is now my boss told me I came in second. And then a few years later, he ended up hiring me, became full time. So it's a lot of mine was just persistence and just being patient through getting so many no's and rejections. And you're wondering, like, did that person get my email? And so it's long. It sounds cliche, but I mean, for me, it was just a process of figuring out how to go about this without being annoying and I don't know, trying to dance around that.
No, that makes sense. And Isabelle, I'm going to kind of start with questions because we've got some questions coming in. And several students have been asking, and I'll start with Isabelle for this. How do you really love your job? How do you know if you love your job? And again, we're going to try to keep going through these quick because I'm getting a lot of questions with that. But so sort of short, quick answers. How do you know, somebody asked, if you love your job? Isabelle, how do you know?
Yeah, that's a great question. I kind of chuckled when I saw that because, I'm right now in a position where I've just left the job I was at, and I started in July, and I'm now transitioning to another one. So I think it's less of, Eileen had spoken about it before when we had just been on with the panelists ourselves and just said, it's called work for a reason. And I think it was hard for me coming out of school where, school is school, but I loved being at Loyola. And I found it so fulfilling, and I found the things I was involved with really enriching. Graduating, I was like, I want to be somewhere where I feel passionate about something. I want to work for, say it was something you use every day. Like, of course, yeah. Oh my gosh, I want to work for Apple. But not everyone's going to be working at Apple. So I think, at my last position, I noticed what I was really good at it. And I was really great at talking to clients, understanding, what they wanted to do, and going back and saying, okay, I've gathered this, and that, and being able to bring a whole new perspective to them. So I think it's less sometimes like, oh my gosh, do you love every aspect of the job? Gabe's talking about he doesn't like getting up before 10. No, I don't like getting up and going to everything. Or sometimes on Sundays, I'm like, oh gosh, 5 days, because, life is fun in other regards and everything. But I think it is about, where you do realize what you love, what you do is when you're able to find those, I think, candid to everything with this, stories that are really compelling. What motivates you, and that's even something to encompass when you're thinking about the job you want to be in. What's going to get you out of bed every day, though, at the end of the day? What's going to have a little bit of story and dimension? I think that for me, when I was kind of perusing through other potential opportunities and kind of harnessing that's what propelled my own move to a shift in an organization to work for healthcare communications, to be making sure that patients and healthcare professionals are getting the actual, most kind of credible and researched information so they can make decisions that are impacting their lives. That's important. So it's something I never would have thought. I had done social media for a brand I loved, and it was, but now I'm like, to be in a completely different position, it's like, no, you're not going to love everything you do. But I think it's less about sometimes the mechanics aspects of, but thinking and taking that bigger picture step back. And I sound like a broke record, but what's the story you're telling, and who are you reaching? And that's really an impactful way of thinking about it.
That's an interesting point to say that. And I'm just going to get to some other questions. I'm going to ask different ones. So it looks like there is one, Alex. So when starting your own, production company, how did you find your connections? And was that kind of anything during your time at Loyola or after? So how did that come about for you?
Sure. It actually, part of why I started Big Vision Empty Wallet was because I did not have a lot of connections at Loyola who wanted to do what I wanted to do. I studied film in high school. Then I went to Tulane, and after Hurricane Katrina, I transferred to Loyola. So when I got there and realized there was not a film major, I was like, oh, fuck, I have made a very big mistake. I went to college knowing exactly what I wanted to do. And I just transferred it to a school that does not have the major that I want to major in. But I ended up going into communications, and I had a minor in film, which I don't know if Loyola still has. There were 3 of us who minored in film in my time there. One of them is now in a ska band, and the other one is like a marine biologist. So I came back to New York and I was like, cool. So I don't know anyone who's doing what I want to do. And starting Big Vision was a way for me finding a community and kind of putting myself in a position of power, for lack of a better word, that made it kind of seem like I was more important than I was at the time. So then people wanted to work with me. And we were screening people's films. This was like at the time when YouTube just had like cat videos, and we were getting people together to screen short films. So I was able to build a community by showcasing other people's work and supporting other filmmakers. And that's really what Big Vision is built on, is trying to lift each other up together. And that mentality has really worked, and the relationships have really lasted. And, while you're at Loyola, if you have the opportunity to meet people who have the same passions as you do and want to ultimately do what you do and want to do and live where you want to live, like, college is the best time to form those relationships, because those are the people who will, work with you for free or very little for the first couple of years while you're, working at a job, but you want to on the weekend make a short film or whatever it is. Like, I didn't have that at all, because at the time, no one else really had the same passions that I did. And if they did, they didn't move to New York. So finding that core team, or your core collaborators and people who actually have complementary skill sets to you. Like, don't work with 5 other people who want to be directors. Find someone in a writing major who has a voice that you love. Find someone who wants to be, who's super organized and wants to be a producer. Find someone who wants to be a cinematographer. Like, don't just find people who do what you do, but find people who complement what it is that you want to do, so you can work together. And it's unfortunate that I didn't have that opportunity there, but because I didn't, I built something that I never thought I would build, just out of necessity. So if you can find collaborators at school, that's phenomenal. And if you can't, then you can figure out a way to support other people and be collaborative, and build that community after school too.
And I bet Loyola grads will help each other out too in building these communities as you go. All right, I got a question for Jim and then one for Gabe. So Jim, this was actually texted to me by one of my students who's interested in getting into sports. What would you say? There's, students that are interested in getting into sports, be it on air, be it writing about it, et cetera. What should they be doing, right now and into thinking about for those first jobs, if you're looking specifically for like getting into some kind of sports field?
Yeah. So I guess, assuming they would have a specific interest, if it was radio or TV, I would recommend trying to get an internship. It's not a thing that you definitely need, but it will certainly help in a lot of cases. I know for me, I wouldn't have ended up with the teams I did had I not taken, I had 2 internships actually. I had one in the summer after I graduated Loyola. They're just helpful. And this is cliche. I'm sure most of you students on here have heard this, but you make connections with people when you have internships. So I worked with a few editors at the Baltimore Sun, one of which I still kept in contact with until a few years ago. They become your references. Same thing when the other internship I had up in the Cape Cod Baseball League in the summer of 2014, I met scouts, I met agents, you just meet so many people, and they pass out their business cards, you exchange emails, texts, and they help you go from there. And it's just kind of like once you get into it, you see that it's like a web of connections with people. And there's so many people you meet once you get your foot in the door somewhere. And I also would just suggest, even if it's something you're not, like say you'd love to be a TV anchor, don't be afraid to try something if it's a writing gig or if it's something that's outside of your comfort zone, because again, it might help you become more well-rounded or open up your eyes to something else.
No, good. And then we only got a couple minutes left before we're going to go into breakout rooms. So you will have more chances to talk to them one-on-one. But Gabe, we've gotten several questions. So kind of quick because we only have a minute or two. Seems to me the theme is people are interested in starting their own design or creative agencies like you've done. What's the one tip you would tell somebody if they're thinking about trying to do what you're doing and starting their own creative agency? About 3 different people have asked that in 3 different ways. So in a minute, what would you tell them in a thing?
People connect to your values more than they connect to what it is you're actually producing. So if you can find ways to authentically show your values, it attracts people. So for me, I really like empathy and respect and intimacy. If I find those in a community, that encourages me to, 1, I work with those people, but 2, the work that I do is also giving off those values. So when you interact with me, you should see, how am I being empathetic to, the community at large? How am I creating intimacy in these spaces? The more I do that, the more I am authentic. People are attracted to that.
They want to work with you. I think authenticity is something for each of you've found. And I think for most people would agree that it's working with you. I've got a lot of questions. I know we're not going to get to be able to in the chat. So what I'm going to do is kind of wrap it up with kind of one question with you guys. And then everybody, we are going to do breakout rooms. So you're going to have from 5:30 to 6 to actually jump around and talk more one-on-one in smaller groups to ask questions, because our panelists have wonderfully agreed to stay and chat more. So if you didn't get your questions answered, I'm also, while I'm kind of wrapping this up, if I could ask all 4 of our panelists to please put your email or whatever contact you wouldn't mind them having, we'll take them and make sure we get them out. But if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat, what's the best way to, if they have other questions, things we don't get to, to connect with you, if you can just put that in the chat, and then we'll also make sure it's there. But students, you can write that down. So I guess my final question before we do this to each of you, and again, keeping it short because we only have about a minute and a half, what would you say was the best thing you took away in a sentence or so from your Loyola experience? I know I'm putting you in the challenge, like a sentence or the best thing that you think in a sentence or a few words.
I would say access. I think you don't realize that when you're at school, you can just use a camera when you want to use a camera. There's Final Cut, there's Avid, there's Photoshop, there's all these things. And then you graduate and it costs so much money. Like use the things that you have access to for free. Well, not for free, but that you have access to now, that you won't have when you graduate, because you can do a lot with the resources that Loyola provides. And I understand, your course load is heavy, but if you have time on the weekends to make a short or make a music video or, start a YouTube channel, whatever it is, do that now while you have the ability and the support and the collaborators to do that before you graduate and you're kind of on your own.
So accessing that. Jim, what's your advice?
Quickly, I guess I'm big on being well-rounded. Try other things. I took a economics course senior year just to do it and try something else, and I did get stuff out of it. Branch out. In retrospect, I wish I did do more to be well-rounded before I left Loyola.
So access, well-rounded. Isabelle.
I would say 100% community. I think, at my first job that I had at Mediaplanet, I was working with 3 Loyola alumni, which I think is amazing. And when it really goes full circle, but the community aspect you can have on campus, you can have in Baltimore. It's so multidimensional. So I know some people were popping questions on how do you get involved in campus, whether you're a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior. Happy to kind of speak to what I did, in the breakout room and how I kind of amplified the community. But I think, it's all there and it's just up for grabs.
Yep. Community, access, well-rounded. Gabe, last one. What would you say?
Explore, reflect. Explore as much as you can. Use, like Alex said, the different things that are available. Try different programs. I remember I tried to make some like animated short using Cinema 4D just because. And then reflect on that process. Did you enjoy it? Was it hard? Was it hard and you enjoyed it? And I think that will help you in your direction.
Yep, reflection in that. So I think this has been fantastic. I know there's so many more questions, and hopefully you'll get a chance in some of the breakout rooms to talk a little bit. We thank you for that, but thank you for those I know that have to go right now. Thank you so much to the four of you. This has been really interesting, and I think, as you've seen from the questions and from our conversation, there's a lot of cool things that you are all doing, that Loyola grads are doing, and there's a lot of future and possibility despite the kind of crazy pandemic society world we're living in. So I just want to thank you again for being greyhounds and giving your time back. And again, thank you for a great discussion.